So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Hannah, our first speaker.
Great, thank you very much. Let me bring up my presentation. Great, so thank you so much for having me today. So my presentation is talking about the culture plan that we've just launched very recently in Plymouth. It's a 10-year culture plan for the city, and just understanding the relationship between culture and power, and the kind of connection to the conversation today. It is a 10-year kind of strategic strategy and document. So I think what's really positive is it crosses over into the conference conversations that have been had over the last few weeks as well. So I'll touch upon that, but then focus on the kind of climate emergency question as well. So just by way of an overview, the culture strategy has a number of different ambitions, but we have agreed on these 3 key drivers, and really these are kind of lenses through which we would consider every action, project, initiative, organisation, and those sit within community, environment and the inclusive economy. And these were really strong consensus on these across all of the consultation that we did about the culture plan. And actually the real challenge in writing a culture plan was, how does it not just become a city plan? Because it was so hard to divorce culture from any other conversation, and so we kind of arrived at this because we felt it important not to do that actually this isn't a sector strategy. This is not about how the creative and cultural industries operate. This is, in addition to that, how culture, creativity are used, cited, developed within the city and across our communities by way of empowering change. So it's kind of very broad overview of what we mean by culture. And as a result, we kind of have these real headline drivers that guide the strategy and will guide the implementation plan. And building off the back of that, we looked at how we would deliver. So the approach that we have taken is to focus on 3 key areas. So space and place being one of them, which obviously was a discussion that was had last week. Really amazing local projects as well as international and national connections that the city has. The sector itself, we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then people and our communities. So again, trying to make sure that these things are not seen in isolation, but are all part of how we move forward that 10-year culture plan. When we look at that question of the environment and that key driver, I think within the cultural sector and certainly within the plan, we've kind of looked at 3 focal points of what we mean by that within the strategy. So I guess the first is that as artists, creatives, practitioners, cultural organisations, we are often early adopters. So you will have seen many organisations putting out climate emergency declarations, really understanding that something needs to be done and really driving that agenda. So we see kind of individual action from artists and cultural organisations. Then we kind of scale it up again and look at how, as a sector, we could have green credentials within the city. So our large events, for example, our festivals, our kind of outdoor space activities, the spectacle that we bring to the city and we produce within the city, what's the credentials of those? How are we making sure that everything we're putting into the public domain in the field of arts and culture kind of has an overarching commitment to making sure that it's low or net impact? And then I guess the area I'd like to focus on is really around the power of creativity. So actually, this is not just the individual action of artists or cultural organisations, but it's how creativity drives social action at a local and global level. And there's something just incredibly powerful about the way arts and culture can engage people, it can challenge people, it can open up conversation on really very, very difficult topics in a way that allows people to talk and question and hopefully take action. And I think that's really within our culture plan what we're talking about. It's not just about policy and strategy, it's about how we use culture and the creativity in everyone to drive positive change and to feel empowered to do so. And I've just included a quote here from Coventry's City of Culture Trust, who have recently received funding for their Green Future programme. And really, they are basically saying, well, why on earth would the climate emergency not be part of a year of culture? Because they are just so intrinsically linked. And there's a couple of points that they make about culture and the environment coming together. The fact that actually it might be the only way that we get proper citizen engagement. And the fact that policy and papers are fine, but actually it's about making people aware and empowering them to make change that's going to be the most significant transformation. So we're seeing other cities, other partners across the UK and globally, really understanding that culture, the environment, climate emergency are not separate conversations, they're one and the same, and that applies to both policy and citizen level. So something that we have been working on within Plymouth and that sits within this plan very, very centrally is the FabCity concept. So in 2019, Plymouth joined the FabCity movement. And this is really looking at how, rather than kind of product in, materials in and trash out, how we start to move data around rather than product and materials. So we reduce waste, we empower local activity to happen, we keep that sort of circular motion happening, but actually we are still connected globally. So the important thing here is that it's a movement, it's not a policy, it's not a program, a product, it's a movement that allows localities to really interpret and to build on what they have, but with some core principles. And so that what we signed up to as a city in 2019 was the kind of FabCity Manifesto. So ultimately that by 2054, we will produce all that we consume as a city, which is of course hugely ambitious, but that within that there are different strands of activity, and I think that's what's really interesting about the FabCity's full stack model, and something that I think, looping us back to the culture plan, is something that I'm very passionate about, and I think the State of Us has really considered is at what point do we work with the state, at what point do we challenge the state, is that within and alongside? And I think something around FabCity really embodies the fact that this needs to happen at every level within a city. And I think the culture plan tries to take that stance as well, that it's about individual action of organisations, of citizens, as well as kind of policy level and strategy level. And so for me, the question that we're asking ourselves around the State of Us is really, where does that allyship sit within the state, alongside the state, outside of the state? At what point do we push and pull those key players and partners to make sure that action happens, challenge takes place, but that actually it's not one or the other. It is not all about what happens at policy level, nor is it all about what happens in a kind of DIY culture. There's something that happens in the middle that makes that possible. And that fundamentally, if we don't have allies sitting within organisations and corporate structures, then the change won't happen in that place either. Oh, wrong one. There we go. So we very much joined the FabCity movement because we felt we were already a FabCity. This was not a kind of pie in the sky. It was aspirational, but it was rooted within Plymouth, which is that we already have, and these are just some of them, amazing organisations and facilities that sit within the city, individual projects and artists and creatives, organisations, you know, kind of collectives. And all of this already sits within Plymouth. And when layered onto a city that has social enterprise status and has done a huge amount of work in terms of building a different kind of economy, a different kind of socially active communities, we felt very strongly that the FabCity movement was an opportunity to connect globally and to really kind of umbrella what we have within the city and make some sense of it, so that we were all driving towards that kind of core manifesto. So we are still making sense of this. I think Ed would acknowledge that as well, kind of what FabCity means to us in Plymouth. But I think fundamentally, what I wanted to flag today was the assets the city already has at every level. the fact that culture for me is very much the driving force and connector behind these conversations, and something that would power people's ability to get involved, but also to take forward the ideas and imagine what those products and services might look like that would help resolve some of these global challenges that we have. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there just as a bit of a framing kind of presentation about where we are as a city and what we're hoping to take forward as some of our initiatives as well. Let me stop sharing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hannah. That was really great. And I really love the idea of culture and the sort of micro-social sort of factors in its sense is a real key driver of behaviour, and it's something we really saw in the state of work earlier on. Also, the idea that sort of creativity is at the heart of change, and almost this idea that sort of art is an extension of communication, but by other means, to sort of have a conversation about some of those complex issues. And we're really excited and looking forward to making Plymouth Fab City a real thing in the not too distant future. Frances, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, and thanks, Hannah. That really was interesting. I'm just reflecting on what you were talking about, working with Bradford at the moment on their City of Culture bid, and how that's connecting and building on Coventry's experience and Hull's experience before that. So every time it feels like they're taking more and more back into kind of community wealth building approach, rather than just have it happen and then disappear again, which I think is fascinating.